HMAS Tarangau was a previous Imperial Australian Naval Force shore foundation arranged on Lombrum Point, Los Negros Island, lying roughly 320 kilometers north of Central Area New Guinea, 2 degrees south of the equator. It was frequently alluded to as Manus Island, from which it was isolated on the west by a limited channel. Today, a scaffold interfaces the two islands which, alongside others, structure the Office of the Chief Naval Officer Islands Bunch. Manus Island is roughly 80 kilometers long and 25 kilometers wide. During World War II, Manus Island was involved, yet entirely not vigorously strengthened by the Japanese. A runway was built at Momoda on Los Negros Island. However, little exertion was made by the involving Japanese to take advantage of the attractions of Seadler Harbor, with its in excess of 100 square miles of profound water safe haven. In any case, the Admiral's Office Islands were of extraordinary key importance, and in January 1944, the partners moved to recover them. This was accomplished by mid-April, with just little dissipated gatherings of Japanese leftover. The recover of the Office of the Chief Naval Officer Islands passed on the way clear for the Americans to foster Seadler Harbor, a characteristic harbor safeguarded by a boundary reef and 11 more modest islands. Some $2.6 million was contributed by the U.S. on improvement that included developing extra runways, streets, power plants, water reticulation, fuel and ammo stockpiles, a base camp, garrison huts, an interchanges place, mailing station, and a 1,000-bed clinic enhanced by 3 more modest offices. Broad wharfage and landing stages were developed alongside studios and other help offices along the foreshore, including floatplane fix offices. Inside the harbor, drifting harbors, some equipped for tolerating ships, were added to give extra fight harm and fix capacity. Towards the finish of the conflict, Manus Island had become quite possibly one of the largest U-bases in the Pacific, and it was a basic organizing point for the partnered assault to free the Philippines. On 11 October 1944, beyond what 200 boats could be found at anchor in Seadler Harbor, including 6 war vessels, 20 plane-carrying warships, 9 cruisers, 42 destroyers, 3 submarines, 42 destroyer companies, and 85 assistants. After the Second Great War, the RAN laid out a solitary high-level maritime base at Dreger Harbor, close to Finschhafen, on the New Guinea Central Area. It was utilized mostly as a forward-working and coordinated factors base. Late in 1945, the U.S. government made proposals to Australia concerning the eventual fate of the Manus Island Maritime Base. In WAC 1946, the U.S. Secretary of State proposed the U.S. be given long-haul base freedoms at Manus Island to be shared mutually with Australia. Conversations followed for around 15 months, after which the U.S. chose to pull out. The U.S. later contracted to sell all movable and naval force fixed resources for the Chinese public government, with the Australian government assuming control over the leftover resources. In 1949, the RAN moved from its current base at Dreger to lay out a high-level maritime base at Lombrum Point on Los Negros Island. The office appointed as HMAS Seadler on 1 January 1950. Nonetheless, the name Seadler, signifying Ocean Hawk, had joins with German colonialism, which was viewed as an improper name for a RAN shore foundation. Thusly, the name was changed to Tarangau, a word local to that district with a similar significance, and that utilized at the previous stop at Dreger Harbor. On 1 April 1950, the base formally recommissioned as HMAS Tarangau. The essential job of HMAS Tarangau was to give forward fueling, logistical, communications, and maintenance support to boats of the Royal Australian Navy, and to aid in the training of members from a Papua New Guinea division of the RAN. In the mid-1950s, it was also home to about 150 Japanese prisoners of war, most of whom were serving time for war crimes and who were put to work as laborers. In that capacity, they built various facilities, including a church and a swimming pool. 5 of their number were executed at Manus Island in June 1951, following convictions of killing Australian prisoners of war in conditions described as primitive and revolting. HMAS Tarangau was manned continuously by RAN officers and ratings throughout its long-term commission. Externally, the appearance of the base changed little since the end of the Second World War. Various Quonset huts erected during the war remained in place, being used variously for accommodation and as workshop and storage spaces. Later, more permanent housing was constructed, but the presence and destructive nature of white ants proved a constant source of worry over the lifetime of the base. The climate, too, was challenging, being tropical with an average temperature of 27.1 degrees Celsius and significant rainfall even during the driest month. Around 3,500 millimeters of rainfall fell annually. The impact of the climate on infrastructure required a continuous maintenance and repair program in the fight against decay, rust, and rot. The Manus Island area was generally a healthy one, although it was in a malarial region, and outbreaks of the disease rarely occurred in Europeans as long as they took prophylaxis. Other tropical ailments, such as coral wounds, ulcers, and tropical ear infections, were common but easily treatable. A significant and colorful ceremony marked the decommissioning of HMAS Tarangau on 14 November 1974, when the base was handed over to the then newly formed PNG Defense Force. At the same time, the 5 attack-class patrol boats were also transferred to PNG, taking on the prefix Her Majesty's Papua New Guinea ship, HMPNGS, but retaining their former names. Arguably, the success of Tarangau was the cohesiveness of its ship's company in such a remote area, and the ability of those serving there and their families to integrate and involve members of the local community in much of its operation. Many of those who served in Tarangau made lifelong friendships with the Papua New Guineans, with whom they lived and worked, during a time when forward defense was a central part of Australia's defense strategy.